Finding Nemo and Shark Tale were, shockingly enough, not the first time Pixar and DreamWorks Animation have produced films with suspiciously similar premises within a year of each other. Ants and A Bug's Life both launched in 1998, sparking a feud between the two companies. Although, by the time Finding Nemo rolled around in 2003, this feud had largely subsided. Still, when two high-profile animated movies with star-studded casts both focus on the lives of sea creatures and both feature a shark character prominently on the movie poster, and both of whom struggle with not wanting to eat fish by the way, it's pretty hard not to see the parallels. The movies are far from being carbon copies, however, and this comes down to the philosophy each company takes when writing their own movies. I've talked about Pixar before, but their ideology can be summed up by asking, how do we make these non-human characters relatable to humans while still keeping the setting realistic? DreamWorks' approach forgoes the latter part of that question, opting instead to draw as many parallels to human society as possible. This small change in approach will go full butterfly effect, and the end result is two very different movies. Pixar responds by saying, let's give these fish voices, but still give them fish problems to deal with. DreamWorks responds by saying, let's give these fish voices, make them look like humans, use slang like humans, make them live in an underwater New York City like humans, bombard them with product placement, Godfather, homages, and puns! Lots and lots of puns! But hey, one approach isn't inherently better or worse than the other, and both studios have produced lots of great movies. But in this case, I don't think I'm in the minority when I say that Finding Nemo is the better film. But film is a vastly different medium than video games, and as has been shown by myself and many others before me, a good movie does not translate to a good video game necessarily. And guess what two movies both got video games? Water levels have earned themselves a bad reputation. This is mostly because they often have sluggish controls, frustrating physics, dark levels of poor visibility, and perhaps the most obvious, the necessity to refill your lungs with oxygen. Given that there are so few games that take full advantage of a completely underwater setting, you would think that some truly unique and original ideas for gameplay could be created with two games where you get to play as fish in the ocean. And that brings me to the subject of today's video. Before we get started though, I want to mention that this won't be my normal style of review. I don't like using review scores, and because I think opinions are largely subjective, boiling them down to something concrete like a number is pretty useless. But fuck that, let's have some fun with this! Jump the shark, so to speak. The games are so similar that we can compare basically every element of them. We're gonna do this piece by piece, stupid detail only I'd care about by stupid detail only I'd care about. Whoever has the most points in the end wins! Without further ado, let's do the comparison that nobody asked for. First up... Check 1, 2. Finding Nemo requires 1 block and Shark Tale requires 15. Point goes to Finding Nemo. No, I wasn't joking. Next up.
Raise the reef till the break of dawn, so you better put your fresh new dance fans on.
The part where I say for real though, I need to establish some basic things about both the games so we can more easily identify the differences between the two to create an overall more focused and enjoyable review. Much like the movies, the similarities are obvious on the surface, but you'll find they have a lot of fundamental differences when put under a microscope. So it's best to understand the similarities beforehand. Both the games allow you to play as fish, either Marlin, Nemo, and Dory in one case, or Oscar and Lenny in the other. This allows you more movement options than the standard platformer would, meaning you can move left and right and often up and down without restriction. Now despite the fact that a jump function has largely been made irrelevant, you don't have complete freedom of movement, as there is only so much that can be done with 2 analog sticks and some buttons. Moving in a fully 3D environment is hard, specifically the steering aspect, so quite often you will be limited to either a 2.5D plane, or you'll be swimming automatically toward or away from the screen, leaving you to focus on moving up, down, left, and right. It's just an intuitive way of handling things, and it's probably the reason you don't see many of those complex submarine simulators taking off in popularity. Both games have dash-type attacks allowing you to ram into blocks and enemies to break them or beat them. And both have colorful shiny currency that you can collect to satisfy side missions. Both games are linear, featuring standard level-to-level progression with 18 levels for Finding Nemo and 25 for Shark Tale. The length of each individual level ranges anywhere from 1.5 minutes to 35, depending on how good you are. Overall, each game can be beaten in under 2 hours if you know what you're doing, but the extras might just drive you insane, so please, for your sake and for legal reasons my sake, don't go for 100%. But now from this point on, the games start to differ dramatically, so let's take a look at...
Raise it up all day, raise it up all night. We'll drop the beat to the street.
Let the fish rock the mic.
By far the most common level type is the 2.5D plane, where you basically move forward avoiding obstacles until you either make it to the end or collect every necessary item. Finding Nemo's levels always feel slightly more flat than Shark Tale, since Shark Tale has street signs that let you turn 90 degrees to go in a completely different direction in the level. Most of Shark Tale's 2.5D levels feel more connected and more like an actual city, as shown by these maps. Plus, a lot of the levels you only complete by looking around the city and exploring. Shark Tale has pipes that lead to sewers with branching paths and various objects scattered about levels to hide from the paparazzi and the cops. Some of Finding Nemo's levels take place in the fish tank, which are some of the more open levels. These levels focus on finding other fish and moving objects around, although because of Nemo's slow movement speed, backtracking can be more tedious than in Shark Tale. Finding Nemo's levels do a good job of connecting the 2.5D sections with sections where you swim into or out of the screen. In these latter sections, you're generally trying to keep up with another fish, and you do so by swimming through certain rings and finding shortcuts. Other times you're being chased out of the screen by divers or anglerfish, forcing you to try and avoid their advances. Shark Tale has its own versions of these levels, where you play as either a taxi or Lenny, and you try to make it somewhere under a time limit or by smashing a certain number of newspapers. Some of Finding Nemo's 2.5D levels add complexity by making you race through an area against the clock, or by making you switch between Dory and Marlin to solve puzzles. Dory is the bigger and stronger fish, with Marlin being small and able to fit into more spaces. This is an interesting mechanic, but it will become tedious when you have to swim back to the start of an area just to switch to the other fish. Finding Nemo also likes to make you bounce on things. This is oddly one of the most frequently used mechanics in the entire game. Now, here's the thing about the Shark Tale game. It's almost as if one of the developers saw the Finding Nemo video game and said, okay, let's do that, but also add in literally everything else. This game has stealth challenges where you need to sneak in deep into the enemy stronghold, confrontations with superior enemies you can't win against, a bona fide torture scene, and an epic level where you fight against a series of 3 different themed bosses on top of a large building situated in the ocean. The ocean. Okay, just give me 1 minute. I'm gonna go look something up because, yeah. Well, it says here. Okay, yeah, because why wouldn't Oscar's voice actor be the voice of Vamp? Why wouldn't things work out like that? Oh, look! Raiden was voiced by the same guy who did Middle-Aged Manfish. Yes, of course. Makes sense. Totally. You know what? This joke couldn't get any more perfect. Oh wait, yes it could! Liquid Snake's voice actor voiced the eel monster, meaning he voiced a literal liquid snake. Yes! That's true! That's a thing. I thought that joke was stupid. You probably still do. But you know what? It's validated, so... yeah. Yes! Okay, so now that we've established that I will never top that joke ever, it's time to talk about what is by far the best part of the game, the dancing levels. No crap, no time wasted, just full-on DDR-style arrow-mashing paired of songs like You Can't Touch This, Car Wash, Living La Vida Loca. I can't get over how ridiculous this looks, and yet how much fun I'm having. It's just fun. There is no other word for it. Shark Tale wins in this category for pure variety alone, no question. Next, let's talk about something that is essential to any good game. Having good...
Get it up, raise it up. Raise the reef. Raise the reef.
This one is actually pretty simple. Finding Nemo is slow. Shark Tale is fast. Nemo is a fairly sluggish game that requires some serious manipulation of the analog stick, especially in the levels that have a current. Trying to move this ball around is a real challenge since it's hard enough to move your own character with any accuracy. But even though the game is so slow, the screen is so zoomed in that you can still run into enemies that you didn't know were coming off screen. Look how fast I died right here. You can't turn around fast enough for this to be fair. What's crazy is that despite Shark Tale being a much faster game, whenever I ran into a hazard, I always felt like it was on me. Oscar turns on a dime, and his swim speed is slow enough for you to maneuver easily, and then you can mash his dash attack to zoom around like a pro if you want to get somewhere fast. Take a look at the difference between how well I can accurately move in a densely populated area by comparing the two games side by side. There's a pretty big difference here. In addition, for the sections where you swim into the screen, Finding Nemo either makes you guess where an enemy is going to attack, or spawns rings without indication of where they're going to appear. Shark Tale almost always has arrows telling you where you need to dodge to, making it much more reasonable. Shark Tale's dash attack also takes out enemies way more effectively than in Finding Nemo. Without a doubt, Shark Tale wins in this category. Speaking of hazards though, we should definitely talk about...
Yo, crank up the bass and turn up the treble. We about to have a party well below sea level.
Okay, so Finding Nemo wastes no time in explaining the harsh realities of life to you by showing that you're a little bitch and anything that hits you will kill you instantly. The only thing that keeps you from dying automatically are the krill you find from fallen enemies and hidden away in corners. Now, as frustrating as it is that when you die, you respawn with no krill, what's even more frustrating is the fact that you lose krill at inconsistent rates. You will quickly end up back at square one. And the krill are only in the 2.5D levels, all the races and chase sequences don't allow you to get hit at all. And these parts feature obstacles where the thing most likely to kill you is the lack of depth perception, working in conjunction with the weird hit detection and the lack of telegraphed hazards in the environments. And it's kind of a dick move to put a ring of shells directly in the path of an ink spray like this. Shark Tale instead opts for a health bar for most of its levels, allowing you to take several hits before you die. Most non-boss levels allow you to enter people's houses where they offer you health replenishing food, an action that I can only assume would get you killed in real life New York. This system works much better, as you aren't pressured to frantically search for krill every time you respawn. And when comparing how well your character controls in each game, losing in Finding Nemo is just frustrating, whereas losing in Shark Tale feels like your fault. Overall, Shark Tale feels like it's harder because it was designed to be, not because it was designed poorly, and for that it gets a point. Now to illustrate this, I do think it's worth taking a slightly more analytical and thoughtful look at some of the hardest parts of the game, otherwise known as...
Perching with my urchins, frontin' just for the hell of it. We'll gallop with the scallops on down the canal of it.
At the risk of sounding pretentious, I would like to think that I'm of above average intelligence. At the very least, smart enough to figure out 2 E-rated games. But that was proven not to be the case. Both games featured parts that were hard, frustrating, and in general not that enjoyable. But there were some very, very specific points that stood out. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I speak for all of us when I say fuck whoever came up with the sliding tile puzzles! Why would you do this? It's just a simple puzzle where you have 8 tiles that make a picture in a 3x3 grid. And from a glance, you think it looks simple, but no, you sweet summer child, rest easy, knowing you have not had to endure the terror that is this puzzle. It's just so unfitting for a game like this, especially since they put it at the end of the submarine level, already the hardest level in the game. This is literally 9 minutes of me just trying to solve this puzzle. Okay, to be fair, I am playing this up a bit, and at the very least, it's the only one in the— Why would you put another one in the next level? Why? Why? Also, I lied. There are 4. This is game design. Oh, so this snail game is pretty fucking stupid? It would be safe to say that this game pissed me off. But somehow, against all odds, Shark Tale managed to get me even angrier. Shark Tale's boss levels feature Oscar being chased around by a large predatory sea creature, forcing you to dodge and return the favor with a variety of punches. These sequences are long, confusing, and basically the worst thing ever. The instructions were no help, and I basically just ended up dodging as best I could and mashing the punch buttons with little to no effect. I'd literally be 1 hit from winning, but 1 bad dodge gets me locked into a sequence of shark bites that ended with me restarting a 7-minute fight. The stealth levels can be frustrating because the fish you're trying to hide from don't necessarily have a very obvious field of vision. Sometimes you even have to worry about these fish, which are kinda the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. And this escape sequence where you have to run from Don Leno was so confusing and disorienting that one mistake basically means you lost the level. At least if finding Nemo's tile puzzles, you would eventually get better at them because you're doing the same thing over and over. Shark Tale's sections just kept getting harder and harder. In this case, the point goes to Nemo. It is worth mentioning that Shark Tale's boss fights aren't the only time you deal with sharks, which is why I made a whole section for—
The snails try to bust, but they be way too slow. Get eaten up by all the sharkies like they're escargot.
These parts are much more enjoyable in that they're just simple follow the arrows to avoid getting eaten. Simple, engaging, and they look pretty cool too. Now why did I make this its own section, you ask? Well, although Shark Tale certainly has more encounters, Finding Nemo has one of its own to compete with. Here we have Bruce— Oh my god! What? Who? Who did this? I don't need this in my life! Multiple people were somehow okay with this! Why would you make the eyes black? That's not something you do by accident! I suppose we could go on to a lighter note now and talk about the— Both games feature a currency system as well as some extra objectives in all their levels. For the currencies, Nemo uses colorful seashells and Shark Tale uses pearls. In Nemo, you can either collect them as single seashells or by swimming through a ring of them. And in general, most stages have a secondary challenge that require you collect a certain number of them. Both games let you break obstacles and enemies to release their currency to collect, but Shark Tale has one variation that makes it much more interesting. Shark Tale has larger pearls sitting around in the environment until you start swimming around them, at which point a yellow ring will start to encircle the pearl. Swimming around the pearl quickly enough will cause it to explode into lots of pearls. These pearls are often hidden around enemies and hazards, meaning you have to be careful when trying to encircle them, or you'll just end up getting yourself killed. I kinda like that Shark Tale is almost daring you to try and get every pearl. Like I mentioned, both games have side missions that you can complete. In Finding Nemo's case, this includes swimming through every single ring of bubbles you see, or moving the stupid colored rocks back and forth because who keeps leaving these here? Completing these objectives for a given level opens up, surprise, bonus level, a new, more challenging level just for the hell of it, because why would I not want to do a harder version of a thing I just did? Shark Tale takes a much different approach by having its side missions contribute to a fame meter. Shark Tale always has 3 missions per level, with the first being required to beat the level, while the other 2 are just for extra fame points. Shark Tale's fame system has you starting as a nobody so you can work your way up to the ultimate level of fame, the Oscar level. Your fame level dictates what you can buy from the game's shop with your pearls, giving an actual purpose to them. These side objectives range from collecting a certain number of pearls, beating a level within a certain amount of time without taking too many hits, not getting spotted by the police, or just killing every single enemy in a stage because, you know, genocide. There's much more variety in Shark Tale, so for this, plus the reward incentives, it earns a point. But enough about the gameplay. Let's take a moment to talk about—
Guess he missed the silent side that said no invertebrates. But when he shook the hook and he took the dance floor, he squirmed and did the worm like no one's ever done before.
Both of the games are actually strong contenders in this department, for very different reasons. They do an admirable job of evoking the tone and style of their respective movie. Whereas Shark Tale had a more laid back and groovy soundtrack with lots of reggae and funk music, Finding Nemo was largely an orchestral affair, bombarding you with sweeping scores whenever it feels like it. Shark Tale absolutely owns its style by featuring a dozen licensed songs including Can't Touch This, Car Wash, Wipeout, and The Bad Boys. These are the background tracks for the more upbeat and silly sections of the game, to contrast with its original compositions that were written for the more tense sequences of the game. The licensed songs are the clear winners in this case. The sequence where you fight all the robbers while climbing the skyscraper with Bad Boys playing in the background is so ridiculous you can't help but smile every time you play it. It's hard to get angry at a game that has this in its soundtrack. And there is no physical way to ever get tired of doing the hammer time. But as much as I hate to say it, even the hammer time can't keep you from the wave of pure emotion that Finding Nemo's soundtrack will elicit from you. Without exaggerating anything, Finding Nemo's orchestral score is one of the most sentimental and well-composed collections I've seen in a licensed game. The title theme was what I used at the start of this review for one, and one of my favorite pieces of any game music in recent memory is the one for level 3, The Drop-Off. Honestly, just listen. I honestly can't get over how good that song is. And although only a few tracks are on the same level as this one, all of the tracks are appropriate for their level's tone and just some damn fine pieces of music. Point goes to Nemo. And now as long as we're on the subject of presentation, let's take a look at...
The stingrays kept stinging and the blowfish blew, and the starfish were just chilling with the oceanic crew.
Neither of these games look very good. On the one hand, at a passing glance and from a distance, these games look kinda nice. The environments in Finding Nemo can be colorful and vibrant, but only really in the reef areas. The game kinda shoots itself in the foot by including a lot of levels that take place in sewers and rusty submarines, not to mention the inside of a whale. And it's hard to make these levels look good with the graphical capabilities they had at the time. This is especially apparent during a couple early levels when the frame rate drops pretty badly, although it doesn't show up in the capture, and I'm told this isn't true for all consoles. What makes the game's graphics truly lackluster is the uncanny valley of the fish tank levels, where the backgrounds are just way too bare. The game's textures overall are just not pretty, but we can't exactly bring up the uncanny valley without talking about Shark Tale now, can we? Finding Nemo's characters are exaggerated versions of typical fish anatomy with cartoonish facial features, which makes the characters seem friendly but not too human. Shark Tale's characters are just a bit too human-like, somewhere in between mermaids and the fish equivalent of furries. I can only imagine the original pitch for Shark Tale. Okay, hear me out. What if we make Will Smith a fish, and also do you have more cocaine? Thankfully for the game, the zoomed out camera and less detailed visuals do it a favor, resulting in a colorful cityscape with lots of different and interesting fish types, assuming you don't stare too closely at their faces. The textures look better, there's more detail put into the backgrounds, and overall it just looks more professional. Okay, what the fuck? Yet another point to Shark Tale. And lastly,
Busy getting fly with the octopi, you don't hear me though. I gave a CQ combo my number.
well, as far as plots go, they mostly follow their respective movies. When adapting movies as games, developers have the challenging task of expanding 90 minutes of movie into hours of gameplay. Generally, this means content has to be made up. In Finding Nemo's case, we get that 10-second scene of Nemo escaping from the sewers turned into a full level. Nobody likes sewer levels! The game can't seem to make a commitment to whether it wants to make its own cutscenes or just reuse footage from the movie. In Shark Tale's case, it takes a much more liberal approach to story, by making not only original cutscenes, but completely changing the direction of the story at certain points. They invented a reason for Oscar to sneak into the shark's hideout. They invented a goddamn heist level where you have to fight an army of pufferfish, eels, and squids, and I will never be unhappy to see more impromptu dance parties. But they also seem to have changed a major part of the film's plot. Oscar actually beats both a shark and an eel in hand-to-hand combat. I would think that would make him a legitimate shark slayer, and not just a fake? Did they actually think that through? The voice acting in Finding Nemo was rather dull, and scenes like this somehow succeed in making all the characters unsympathetic. Shark Tale actually has a lot more original lines, leaving room for silly one-liners and jokes, and Phil Lamar actually makes Oscar's character more likable than Will Smith ever did. I still have no idea why there are these weird documentary-style interviews that take place after the movie. But regardless, and you probably saw this coming, it's another point to Shark Tale. Now at this point, there really only is one thing left to do.
Now all the salmon come to visit from way downstream just to hear the holy mackerel tabernacle scream.
Shark Tale is a better game! If we're being serious here, the point totals should really look more like this. It should be no surprise which game I preferred between these two. Finding Nemo plays things really safe, and even then it doesn't do anything particularly well. And despite how frustrating Shark Tale can be at points, it will win you over within the next few levels with how creative and crazy it can get. I'm legitimately surprised that Finding Nemo ended up losing, especially given the fact that Traveler's goddamn Tales made that game. And even though this game doesn't really change my view of the two movies, I can kinda see why some people really like the ideas behind Shark Tale so much. Finding Nemo was a movie about a father and son who would do anything to find each other, and we got a game that told that story. Technically, on the other hand, what about Shark Tale? Well, Shark Tale continually defied my expectations by always trying something new, crazy, and even when it wasn't fun, you knew it meant well. And even after I swore I was done with the game and that I wasn't going to deal with its crap anymore, it immediately apologized and won me back over. So even after going in with no expectations, I left thinking much more highly of the game, despite all its flaws. And if you'll forgive me for looking way too deep into this, kinda reminds you of someone, doesn't it? So I say this to any Shark Tale fans out there. Feel content with this knowledge. Feel proud in knowing that there's one thing those high and mighty Finding Nemo fans will never have. But you sure as hell do. Because without a doubt, you guys got the better video game. God, are you okay? You stayed until the end of the video. Are you okay? First of all, thank you. Second of all, do you need anything? Do you need, say, a glass of water? Do you need, say, a similar video that takes a look at another one of Pixar's properties video games? I mean, I do have that. Or what about a review of a Tarzan game, or me just being done with my friends? Those are also things that I have. Oh, you have stopped breathing. Okay, you don't budge. I'm gonna be right back, and I'm gonna go call someone. Yeah.